The sun peeked through the curtains of the modest but cozy apartment in the heart of New York. James Carter, 36, stirred in his bed, reaching instinctively for the other side. It was empty, like it often had been for the past few months. His wife, Lisa, always seemed to have early morning appointments lately. But James, a mechanical engineer with a demanding schedule, dismissed the thought. He dragged himself out of bed and looked at the framed photo on his nightstand. Him and Lisa on their honeymoon in Paris 5 years ago. Her radiant smile in that picture was etched into his memory. "We were so happy," he murmured, brushing his thumb over the glass. James' life was straightforward. Work hard, provide for his wife, and save for the future. Lisa had been his everything since they met at a mutual friend's wedding. She was charming, outgoing, and ambitious, with dreams of starting her own interior design business. James had always supported her dreams, even when it meant taking on extra hours to ensure they had enough money for her projects. Lately, though, James had noticed subtle changes. Lisa's phone would buzz at odd hours, and she'd quickly swipe it away. Her laughter, once reserved for their private jokes, now seemed louder during late-night phone calls she claimed were with clients. "James, I need to head out early today," Lisa called from the kitchen as James buttoned his shirt. "Another client meeting?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, busy season," she replied without looking up, grabbing her purse. She barely kissed him on the cheek before rushing out the door. James frowned. Busy season for interior design? It didn't sit right, but he shook it off. He trusted Lisa. It wasn't until a Friday evening 2 weeks later that the truth began to surface. James had finished work early and decided to surprise Lisa with dinner at their favorite Italian restaurant. On his way, he passed a bar downtown and caught a glimpse of someone familiar through the window. Lisa. She wasn't alone. Sitting across from her was a man in a tailored suit, leaning in too close for comfort. Lisa was laughing, her hand lightly grazing the man's arm. James' heart sank, and his grip on the steering wheel tightened. He told himself it was probably a business meeting, until he saw her lean forward and kiss the man. The world around him blurred. James parked his car in a nearby alley and sat there, gripping the steering wheel. His chest felt tight, his throat dry. "This can't be happening," he whispered to himself, staring at the dashboard. He didn't confront her that night. Instead, he drove home and waited. When Lisa returned a few hours later, her excuse was the same as always. "Long meeting, lots of planning to do." James nodded, his expression unreadable. He wasn't ready to explode. Not yet. Over the next week, James became a man obsessed. He started checking Lisa's phone when she wasn't looking, finding cryptic texts from someone saved as Ryan, client. The messages weren't businesslike. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." James' hands trembled as he read the words. He snapped a photo of the texts with his own phone before putting hers back on the counter. He also started tracking her movements, something he never thought he'd do. One night, he followed her to a hotel on the other side of town. She entered the lobby with Ryan, holding his hand, laughing like a carefree teenager. James sat in his car, the betrayal washing over him in waves. When Lisa returned home that evening, James was sitting in the living room, the dim light casting shadows across his face. "How was your meeting?" he asked, his voice calm but icy. Lisa froze for a moment, then recovered. "It was fine." "Why?" James stood and walked toward her, holding up his phone. The photo of her and Ryan entering the hotel glared back at her. Lisa's face drained of color. "I followed you," James said, his voice cracking slightly. "I know everything." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. After a long silence, she finally said, I didn't mean for you to find out like this." "That's it? That's all you have to say?" James shouted, his voice echoing through the apartment. Lisa looked at him, her expression shifting from guilt to defiance. "It's not like we were happy, James. You're always working. You never have time for me. Ryan makes me feel alive." James stared at her in disbelief. "I sacrificed so much for you, for us, and this is how you repay me?" Lisa crossed her arms. "You act like you're perfect, James, but you were never there. Maybe if you paid more attention to me, this wouldn't have happened." Her words cut deeper than James thought possible. A week after their confrontation, James received legal papers in the mail. Lisa was filing for divorce and demanding alimony. James sat at his kitchen table, staring at the papers in stunned silence. Alimony? After everything she'd done? The audacity was infuriating. She cheats on me and then expects me to pay her for it, he muttered, shaking his head. His initial grief gave way to rage. That was the moment James decided he wouldn't go down without a fight. He would find a way to outsmart Lisa and make sure she didn't walk away unscathed. James sat in his home office late into the night, staring at the divorce papers. The anger simmering in his chest had replaced the heartbreak. If Lisa wanted a fight, she would get one. He began researching everything he could about divorce and alimony laws in his state. One line in particular caught his attention. Adultery can affect alimony rulings. A grim smile played on his lips. So, infidelity does matter, he muttered. He printed screenshots of Lisa's text with Ryan, the photos he had taken of them entering the hotel, and receipts from her late-night escapades that he had tracked through their shared credit card. He realized he couldn't do this alone. The next day, he called his best friend, Mark, a sharp-tongued lawyer who had been James' college roommate. Mark listened intently as James laid out everything. "Let me get this straight," Mark said, leaning back in his chair. "She cheats on you, files for divorce, and has the nerve to demand alimony?" "Exactly," James replied, his fists clenched. Mark chuckled darkly. "Well, she's about to learn the hard way that you don't mess with a man who's been keeping receipts. Let's start building your case." The next week, James met Lisa and her lawyer for an initial mediation session. Lisa sat across the table, looking calm and composed, as if she hadn't turned his life upside down. "I'm asking for fair spousal support," Lisa said coolly, her lawyer nodding in agreement. James fought the urge to laugh. "Fair? You're asking me to support the woman who cheated on me?" Lisa sighed dramatically. "James, I deserve this. I gave up so much for our marriage." Mark leaned forward, his tone razor-sharp. "Funny, I don't recall giving up involving weekly hotel rendezvous with your lover." Lisa's face froze. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably as Mark slid the evidence across the table. Text messages, photos, and financial records. "Adultery, as you're aware, can significantly affect spousal support rulings," Mark continued, his voice steady. "So, unless your client wants this to go to court and risk walking away with nothing, I suggest we reassess her demands." Lisa's calm facade cracked. "James, you didn't have to do this," she hissed, her tone venomous. "Oh, but I did," James replied, his voice steady but cold. James wasn't content to stop there. He wanted to ensure Lisa's duplicity was exposed, not just to the court but to everyone around her. He began digging into her financials and found something startling. Lisa had been funneling money from their joint account into a secret one for months. "She's been planning this for a while," Mark said when James showed him the records. James clenched his jaw. "She wanted to drain me dry before walking away." "Not going to happen." Mark filed a motion to freeze their joint accounts, effectively stopping Lisa from accessing any more of James' money. Furious, Lisa confronted James at their apartment. "How dare you freeze our accounts?" "I need that money," she shouted. "That's not our money anymore," James shot back. "And don't forget, you already found someone else to take care of you." Lisa's expression darkened. "You'll regret this, James." But he wasn't scared of her threats anymore. As the weeks passed, the case began to escalate. Lisa's affair wasn't just a secret between them. Anymore, it was becoming public knowledge. Mark had filed a countersuit, arguing that Lisa's adultery disqualified her from receiving alimony. Word spread among their mutual friends and Lisa's family. James, once the quiet and unassuming husband, was now seen as the wronged man standing up for himself. Lisa, on the other hand, was beginning to lose the support she had taken for granted. At a mutual friends party, James ran into one of Lisa's former close friends, Emily. "I had no idea she'd been doing this to you," Emily said, shaking her head. "She told everyone you were neglecting her, but now it all makes sense. She's the one who messed up." James shrugged, playing it cool, but inside, he felt a sense of vindication. James knew he couldn't rely solely on legal battles to get even. He wanted Lisa to feel the weight of her betrayal on a personal level. So, he began setting his final plan in motion. He reached out to Ryan, Lisa's lover, pretending to be a potential client interested in his services. Ryan, smug and unaware of James' identity, eagerly agreed to meet. During their meeting, James subtly recorded Ryan bragging about his relationship with Lisa. "She's amazing," Ryan said, sipping his drink. "Her husband's clueless. She's been using him for years." James' hands tightened around his glass, but he forced a smile. "Sounds like a catch." The recording was the last piece of the puzzle. The day of the final court hearing arrived. Lisa, dressed impeccably, looked confident. But James was prepared. As the proceedings began, Mark presented their evidence, including the financial records, texts, photos, and the recorded conversation with Ryan. The courtroom fell silent as Ryan's voice echoed through the speakers. "She's been using him for years." Lisa's face turned pale. Her lawyer scrambled to object, but the damage was done. The judge leaned forward, his expression stern. "Given the evidence presented, it's clear this case involves significant misconduct on the part of the petitioner," the judge said, glancing at Lisa. "This will be reflected in the court's ruling." James suppressed a smile as the judge denied Lisa's alimony request and ordered her to pay back part of the money she had siphoned from their accounts. Lisa's confidence had completely unraveled by the time the court adjourned. Outside the courthouse, she stormed up to James in a fury. "You humiliated me in there," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. James stood tall, his expression impassive. "No, Lisa, you humiliated yourself. I just made sure everyone saw the truth." Her voice rose, drawing the attention of passers-by. "You think you've won, don't you? But you're still a bitter, pathetic man clinging to your precious revenge." James stared at her, his voice calm but cutting. "This isn't revenge, Lisa. This is justice. You lied, you cheated, and you tried to ruin me. I just made sure you didn't get away with it." Lisa's anger seemed to falter under his words, but James turned and walked away before she could respond. For the first time, he felt a sense of control, a calm amidst the chaos. A few days after the court ruling, James received an email from an unfamiliar sender. The subject line read, "A proposal you might like." Opening it, James found a message from Ryan. "James, I know you hate me, and I don't blame you. But I didn't realize how much Lisa had been lying to both of us. If you're willing to talk, I'd like to meet and clear the air. Maybe we can both come out of this with some dignity. Let me know." Ryan. James was skeptical, but curiosity got the better of him. He agreed to meet Ryan at a small cafe downtown. When Ryan arrived, he looked noticeably less smug than he had during their first encounter. "Look, I owe you an apology," Ryan began, sitting across from James. "Lisa made me think you were this neglectful husband who didn't care about her. I didn't realize that she was manipulating you too." James finished, raising an eyebrow. Ryan nodded, his shoulders slumping. "Yeah, she told me she'd already filed for divorce months before we met. I didn't know she was still living with you, taking your money. I feel like an idiot." James leaned back in his chair, studying Ryan. He had no intention of forgiving the man, but he couldn't deny the honesty in his tone. Ryan hesitated before continuing. "I want to make it right. Lisa told me she's planning to appeal the court ruling. She's convinced she can twist the narrative and still get alimony." James clenched his jaw. "Of course she is." Ryan leaned forward. "But I have something you can use. She's been telling people at work that she's only marrying me to secure her finances after this is all over. She thinks she's playing both of us." Ryan pulled out his phone and showed James a voice recording. Lisa's voice was unmistakable. "Ryan's useful for now, but once this divorce is finalized, I'll make sure I get what I deserve from James too." James listened, a cold fury rising in his chest. He didn't trust Ryan completely, but this recording was the final nail in the coffin. James forwarded the recording to Mark, who immediately began preparing for Lisa's appeal. At the same time, James decided it was time to deliver one last blow, not out of spite, but to ensure Lisa couldn't manipulate anyone else the way she had manipulated him. He compiled everything: the court transcripts, the financial evidence, and now the recordings. With Mark's help, He shared his story anonymously with a reputable online platform that specialized in exposing fraud and deception. Within days, the article went viral. The headline read, "She cheated, lied, and demanded alimony. How one man fought back." Lisa's name wasn't mentioned, but those who knew the story easily connected the dots. The fallout was immediate. Lisa's reputation in her professional circles took a massive hit. Her interior design business, which relied on trust and word-of-mouth referrals, began losing clients. Lisa showed up at James' apartment a week later, unannounced. She looked disheveled, a shadow of the confident woman she once was. "Are you happy now?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "You've ruined me." James leaned against the doorframe, his expression unreadable. "You ruined yourself, Lisa. I just made sure you didn't get rewarded for it." Tears filled her eyes, but James felt no sympathy. "You took my trust, my love, and my sacrifices, and you threw them away. You don't get to play the victim now." Lisa looked as if she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. She turned and walked away, and James closed the door, feeling an overwhelming sense of closure. The courtroom appeal never happened. Lisa's lawyer quietly dropped the case, and Ryan disappeared from her life. James, for the first time in years, felt free. He returned to his routine, but with a newfound sense of purpose. He reconnected with friends he had distanced himself from during his marriage, started attending networking events, and even began volunteering at a local community center. One evening, at a charity gala, James met someone. A woman named Emily, who was kind, funny, and refreshingly honest. They talked for hours, and for the first time in years, James felt a spark of hope for the future. James scrolled through his emails, sifting through messages from potential clients and colleagues when he stumbled upon one from an unknown sender. It was a terse note from Lisa. "James, congratulations. You won. I hope it was worth it." "Lisa." He stared at the email, feeling nothing. Months ago, such a message might have triggered anger or regret, but now it was just a reminder of how far he had come. Lisa had always played the victim, but James had finally stopped being her audience. Mark called later that day, his tone lighter than usual. "Well, the appeal isn't happening." Lisa's lawyer formally withdrew. "It's over." James exhaled deeply. "Good. Thanks, Mark. For everything." Mark chuckled. "Don't thank me too much. You're paying me well enough. But seriously, James, I'm proud of how you handled this. Most guys would have fallen apart. You stood your ground." James smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone, and I'm just glad it's done." Meanwhile, Lisa was struggling to pick up the pieces of her life. The court ruling, the viral article, and her failed relationship with Ryan had left her isolated. She attempted to rebuild her interior design business, but the loss of high-profile clients and a tarnished reputation made it nearly impossible. Former friends distanced themselves, and even her family, once her staunch supporters, expressed disappointment. One day, she visited her parents, hoping for solace. "You made your choices, Lisa," her mother said, her voice tinged with frustration. "James wasn't perfect, but he didn't deserve what you did to him. And now you're facing the consequences." Lisa's father, who had always adored her, looked at her with quiet disappointment. "It's time to take responsibility, Lisa. You can't keep blaming everyone else." Their words cut deeper than any courtroom defeat. For the first time, Lisa began to question her actions, not just what she had done to James, but how she had sabotaged her own life. For James, life was finally moving forward. He began taking on new projects at work, pouring his energy into creating something meaningful. The long hours didn't feel like a burden anymore. They felt like a chance to reclaim his identity. He also started therapy, something he had resisted during his marriage. Through the sessions, he unpacked the years of emotional manipulation he had endured and began to understand his patterns of self-blame and overcompensation. "Lisa's actions weren't your fault," his therapist reminded him during one session. "But your healing is your responsibility. How you move forward is entirely up to you." James nodded, feeling a sense of clarity. He didn't want revenge anymore. He wanted peace. One afternoon, James found an old shoebox while cleaning out his apartment. Inside were photos, cards, and small mementos from his marriage. He hesitated before opening it, but decided to face the memories head-on. Among the items was a letter Lisa had written to him years ago, during a difficult time in their relationship. "James, I know I can be difficult, and sometimes I feel like I don't deserve you. But I love you, and I want to be better for us. Thank you for never giving up on me." The words felt hollow now, but instead of anger, James felt a sense of closure. He realized he had done everything he could to make the marriage work. If Lisa hadn't valued it, that was on her, not him. He packed the box away, not as a shrine to the past, but as a reminder of how much he had grown. James continued to see Emily, the woman he had met at the charity gala. Their connection grew naturally, without the weight of expectations or the shadows of his past. One evening, they sat on a park bench after a long walk. Emily turned to him, her expression gentle. "You're different, you know. You're grounded. But it's like you've been through something heavy." James hesitated, but decided to be honest. He told her about Lisa, the betrayal, and the long fight for justice. He expected her to flinch or pull back, but instead, she placed her hand on his. "I'm sorry you went through that," she said softly, "but I'm glad it didn't break you." For the first time in years, James felt truly seen. Months later, James received an unexpected letter from Lisa. "James, I don't expect you to forgive me, and I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I've spent a lot of time reflecting, and I realize now how much I hurt you, and myself. I hope one day you can look back on our time together and remember the good moments, even if they were overshadowed by what came after. Lisa." James read the letter twice, feeling a mix of emotions. He didn't know if her apology was genuine or just another attempt to absolve herself, but he decided it didn't matter. He folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, knowing he didn't need to respond. Forgiveness wasn't about letting Lisa back into his life. It was about letting go of the anger that had once consumed him. On a warm spring morning, James stood on the balcony of his new apartment, coffee in hand. The city stretched out before him, full of possibilities. He had a date with Emily later that evening, and he felt optimistic about the future. For the first time in years, he wasn't defined by the pain of his past. As the sun rose higher in the sky, James smiled to himself. He had survived. He had rebuilt, and he was finally free. Several months had passed since James received Lisa's letter, and in that time, he had firmly closed the chapter of his life involving her. One evening, as he was clearing out old documents and photos, he found their wedding album tucked away in a forgotten drawer. He stared at it for a long moment before deciding to let it go. He dropped it off at a donation center the next day, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. That night, James wrote in his journal, a habit he'd picked up in therapy. "For so long, I let my pain define me. I let anger and betrayal hold me back. But not anymore. Lisa was a part of my life, but she's not the sum of it. I'm ready to move forward, to live fully, and to love without fear." He closed the journal and smiled. For the first time, he felt like he was truly in control of his own story. Emily had invited James to a dinner party with a small group of her friends. As they walked into the cozy living room filled with laughter and the aroma of good food, James realized how much his life had changed. The James who had once hidden his pain behind a wall of work and solitude was gone. Now, he was surrounded by warmth and connection. During dinner, one of Emily's friends asked, "So, James, what's been the biggest lesson you've learned in life so far?" James thought for a moment before answering. That healing isn't about forgetting or pretending things didn't happen. It's about accepting the past, learning from it, and choosing not to let it control your future. The room grew quiet as his words sank in, and Emily reached over to squeeze his hand. Later that evening, as they walked home, Emily said, "You're amazing, you know that?" James laughed. "I'm just figuring things out like everyone else." "No," she said, stopping to look at him. "You've been through hell, but you didn't let it harden you. That's rare." James felt a warmth in his chest. He didn't respond with words. Instead, he leaned in and kissed her under the soft glow of the streetlights. Lisa's life had taken a very different path. After losing her business and most of her social circle, she moved to a smaller city to start fresh. She took a job at a design firm, far from the prestige of running her own business, but it gave her stability. For the first time, she wasn't chasing wealth or status. She was just living. One day, while sorting through her things, she stumbled upon an old photo of her and James from their honeymoon. She stared at it, feeling a pang of regret. She had hurt him in ways she couldn't take back, but she hoped that, in time, he had found peace. Lisa placed the photo in a box labeled Memories and sealed it shut. It was time for her to stop looking back and focus on rebuilding her own life. On the anniversary of the court ruling, James took a day off work to reflect. He spent the morning hiking at a nearby nature reserve, letting the crisp air and the sounds of rustling leaves clear his mind. At the summit, he sat on a rock overlooking the valley below. For a moment, he thought about Lisa, not with anger, but with a sense of gratitude. She had been a painful chapter in his life, but she had also been a catalyst for his growth. Without her betrayal, he might never have learned his own strength or discovered what truly mattered to him. James pulled out his journal and wrote, "I forgive her, not for her sake, but for mine. I forgive her so I can finally let go of the past and embrace the life I've built." A year later, James stood in his small but thriving art studio, surrounded by his latest creations. He had rediscovered his love for painting, a passion he had long neglected during his marriage. His work had gained recognition, and he was preparing for his first gallery exhibition. Emily stood by his side, her pride evident in her smile. As the gallery filled with visitors that evening, James felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had rebuilt his life from the ground up, not just materially, but emotionally and spiritually. Later, as they walked home, Emily said, "So, what's next for you?" James looked up at the stars, a serene smile on his face. "Whatever comes, I'm ready." The story ends with James sitting at his desk, pen in hand. He writes a final entry in his journal. Life doesn't always go the way we plan, but that doesn't mean it can't lead us somewhere beautiful. I've learned that the hardest moments often teach us the most important lessons. I've let go of anger, embraced forgiveness, and found love, not just with someone else, but within myself. This is my story, and it's just beginning. He closes the journal and places it on the shelf, a symbol of the past he has finally made peace with.